In this video, I'm going to talk about why Martin and I want to leave the United States. Apologies ahead of time if you hear the planes going overhead and the construction outside, and also for my multiple wardrobe changes, but this was a lot to record all in one time. In another video, I will go over why we want to move to Poland, but this video specifically is about the problems that we have with the United States specifically, our driving factor being that we want to raise a family and just be able to progress in our lives, and hopefully this will explain why we find that so difficult in the United States. So number one on the list is healthcare. And I'm not gonna lie, I never thought this would be at the top of my list because for most of my life I've been young and healthy and I haven't really had to think about it. There have been years at a time where I've had no healthcare, no health insurance at all. And I've never really had to worry about it, but things change. You know, I'm in my mid-30s now. I'm also a we, so I have to also think about Martin's health and our future kids. The healthcare in this country is abysmal, and this is not a controversial issue. Most Americans will agree with this. I think almost all Americans know that even one trip to the hospital could land them in bankruptcy or homeless, and there's just so many problems with the healthcare system. Even calling an ambulance for somebody, you really have to make sure that they're okay with it because it costs thousands of dollars and could really ruin them financially. I'm gonna attempt to break down some of these issues as best as I can. First of all, we don't have what I would call health care in this country. We have symptom care. And what I mean by that is that a doctor would rather give you some type of drugs to treat your symptoms rather than actually treating the problem. Why? Because it's more profitable this way. We have a very much for-profit system in this country. And you may think that, well, if you're very wealthy, then this won't be a problem for you, but that's not necessarily the case either. Hospitals and doctors' offices actually have an incentive to keep you sick. They get kickbacks. They would rather have you keep coming back so they can keep treating you rather than fix the problem. This is actually how the opioid epidemic got started in our country. And if you need more evidence about what I'm describing, just take a look into how our country handled the coronavirus. I won't go deep into that right now, but there's a reason why there was no approved treatment for so long. Health insurance being tied to your employment. This is a huge problem. When you lose your job, you lose your health insurance, like a lot of people did at the start of the pandemic. Martin was one of them. Even though a lot of people pay a lot for their health insurance, there are still some things that you will pay for out of pocket, things that won't be included in your insurance plan. Usually these will be the things that are the most expensive, that use like heavy machinery, mammograms, x-rays, ultrasounds, this type of thing. These things are not covered and will come out of pocket. Now I have to address the aspect of healthcare that is the most important to me personally at the present moment, and that is that I want to have a baby, which is one of the reasons why we would like to leave the US sooner than later. The United States is the most expensive place in the world to have a baby. The average cost is about $10,800, and that's without any complications. If you add in complications, like if you have to have a C-section or something like that, it can be hundreds of thousands more. And most people can't afford to pay these exorbitant costs right at the beginning of their baby's life because babies are expensive. Also, the mortality rate for women is very bad. It's estimated between 15 to 30 maternal deaths per 100,000 births. That's a pretty high number, and it scares me personally. And this doesn't happen usually like during birth or right after birth, like you'll see in TV shows and movies. This will usually happen like the day after, just from something that goes unchecked, unnoticed, like there's a hemorrhage or a heart condition or something like that. So you can still pay, again, an exorbitant amount of money and still not be treated. And of course, I'm already at a disadvantage because I'm in my mid-30s. Now, health insurance doesn't include dental. I'll let you guess why. It's because it doesn't make you a more efficient worker. So in addition to health insurance, you might also have to purchase dental insurance and possibly even vision as well. But even if you have dental insurance, this doesn't necessarily mean that you are covered if you need a procedure done. If you have government-sponsored healthcare, the basics will be covered: cleanings, x-rays, possibly fillings. I'm not quite sure about that, but the bigger stuff, no. If you need something done that your doctor has deemed medically necessary, well, first of all, he or she doesn't get to make that decision. Some random insurance provider might decide that what your doctor thinks is medically necessary actually isn't, so they won't cover it. Then you're left coming out of pocket, and believe me, you cannot afford that. Or maybe you can, in which case you're probably not watching this video. So you can't afford it, and this means that this could mean the difference between saving a tooth and losing it. If you lose it, best case scenario, you could maybe get an implant, which again is very expensive and you can't afford it. Or worst case scenario, you get a nasty infection and die. We certainly do not have a better healthcare system in this country than any other country. I know that in some countries where they have socialized healthcare, they complain about wait times. And believe me, I get it. But sometimes having to wait is better than just not having something done at all. I'll give you an example. Martin had a botched meniscus surgery years ago. He'll have to have surgery again in order to fix it, probably just remove it entirely. And if it was a matter of waiting and eventually getting it done for free or maybe really cheap, he would have done it years ago. But it's not like that. You simply have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get it done, but not right away. Because remember, this requires a specialist whom you have to be referred to. And you don't get to choose who your doctor refers you to, even if you've done your own research and you found a specialist that you would like to spend your money on. Too bad, because this one gives your doctor a kickback. Sorry. Also remember that your insurance has to approve it, which they still might not. I could do a whole segment on Medicaid mills. We just had a fun experience with that lately, but I don't want this video to be 2 hours long, but it's worth looking into. I'm not saying that socialized healthcare is the way to go, but I am saying that nothing can be worse than what we have. Next is education. There is no way I want to put my kids through school in this country. For context, Martin went to private school here in New York, and I went to public school, so we did have different experiences. I can only really speak to my own. Public schools are overcrowded. They were when I was a kid. They're even worse now. Teachers have far too many students to deal with, each with their own learning style, and it seems like the teachers spend a disproportionate amount of time having to deal with disruptive students. I don't blame them for that. It's just the way the system is. US public schools don't focus on any practical life applications. I don't know any millennial who had home economics. I'm sure it does exist, but it's something our parents had and it's just kind of disappeared. So we have math, science, English, etc., but we don't learn what I would consider more important things, like how to interview for a job, how to budget, how to fix things, how to build things, how stocks work, etc. To be fair, I did learn about stocks, but I was like 11 or so. So like we have more important things to worry about at that age, like Pokemon cards. So we don't put any focus on practical life skills. And I think that's been a huge detriment to my generation in particular, because we just don't have the same skills that the generations before us had. Some of us get stressed out just having to write a check. I'm joking, but no, I'm not. We don't put focus on learning other languages. I did take Spanish for a majority of my education, but for whatever reason, and maybe it's because the teachers just didn't know that half our country would be speaking Spanish in 50 years, there just wasn't stress put on this is important to learn, and also how to learn other languages. Because once you know how to learn a language, it makes learning other languages a lot easier. And in this day and age, we've become much more global, and it's become really important. And I will say that not being able to speak Spanish has been a detriment to me in my adult life when competing for jobs. School spending is stagnant. It was when I was in school, it's worse now. And that was even when the economy was good. Teachers are paid poverty wages. They're basically a lot of times made to be these glorified babysitters. The parents just expect them, like, this is your kid during school hours, just to take care of them. This has changed since the pandemic because a lot of parents are starting to get involved very heavily in their child's education. They've been seeing what's been happening over Zoom, and they're taking a lot more interest. But in general, the teachers are they're under way too much pressure for far too little pay. They'll often come out of their own pocket to pay for school supplies. They're working unpaid hours, after school, before school, whatever. And they do care about their kids. They do unpaid hours because they want the kids to succeed. But they just don't have the support. That they're often lately having to have second and third jobs just to support themselves. That should never happen. That's abysmal. We should revere our teachers for giving our kids the greatest gift of education, but they're burnt out. Back in 2001, we had what was called the No Child Left Behind Act, which is how we got the Common Core method of teaching. So basically, teachers make sure that the student has a satisfactory grade and pass them. Even if they don't fully understand the fundamentals of what they're being taught, just make sure they pass. And it became performance-based pay for the teachers. And then if the kids have to pass in order for the teachers to keep their jobs, like, naturally some kids are gonna slip through the cracks and just get shoved on. And this has created the dumbing down of our students and our society as a whole, because this started 2 decades ago. To be clear, I don't blame the teachers for this. This comes from the top down. For the most part, I would say the teacher unions are to blame. Teachers unions, they don't help parents, they don't help students, and I would even say they don't do much to help the teachers either. But, the school board set the curriculum and the teachers have to follow it. Then, as was the case with my generation, you're taught to graduate, go off to college, put yourself in debt, and then go out in the world and become little worker bees. And instead of complaining about unfair wages and unsafe working conditions, which are legitimate concerns, my generation tended to complain about things like a lack of diversity. And on the face of it, that sounds like a great cause. But the thing is, when you're not standing up for yourself and your rights, you are inevitably hurting everyone around you and everyone who comes up after you. And that's what's happened. And then there's not really much use in attending higher education anymore. That's kind of another topic, but unless you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, etc., you're much better off now picking up a trade and getting good at that, or figuring out what you are really good at and figuring out a way to monetize that. Because besides healthcare debt, student loan debt is one of the biggest problems we have in this country. It affects so many people, and it's really ruined people's lives because it just puts things out of reach for them. You're basically in debt for 20 plus years. I mean, some people for life. And the way that they distribute your loan payments, it's very predatory. So most people will constantly have several loans going at once, and the way that they'll distribute the payments, they'll always put it to where no payment ever really gets paid off. So they want you to constantly be in debt. And it's extremely predatory. What's funny, kind of, is that when you're looking for that loan, when you're wanting to go to college, they will market it to you as financial aid. But then once you're a graduate, it's student loan debt. It's the exact same thing. It hasn't changed. It's just marketed differently for an adult versus a child. And then when you're finally lucky enough to be able to pay off your student loans, guess what happens to your credit score? That's another thing that the credit score just came about in the 80s, and it's another thing that's just effed millennials into the ground. And but that's another topic. But they sure did stress the importance of going to college, because as everyone knows, you can't get a job in this country without a college degree. But you can look and see that people who are graduating college today are not any more learned than a person who graduated high school 20 years ago. We are literally getting dumber. Literally. More and more parents are opting for homeschool for all the reasons that I've already mentioned, but also because they've realized that their children are being sexualized in school, their children are being indoctrinated in school. Another topic I can't really go down the rabbit hole on, but basically a lot of teachers are bringing their own politics into the classroom. I don't so much mind it if you're at least a teenager and you're starting to interact with the world around you and you're starting to form your own opinions. As long as the basics don't fall by the wayside, math, science, English, history, I still don't love it, but at least, you know, we could start to have a conversation about it. But this is being taught to children. 5-year-olds, no. It's pure indoctrination at that point. And with the way that they have tortured our children, yes, I said tortured, the last 2 years, I don't know when we'll ever get back to any semblance of normal in the classroom. I don't think we ever will. I don't think we ever will. The kids who've had to grow up in this pandemic, not only have they grown up on tablets and on social media, but then when they actually are in the classroom, they don't get to see each other's faces. They have not been able to pick up on normal social cues. I don't know how they're gonna be able to interact with each other once they've grown up, but just because of the pandemic itself, their education is years and years behind what it should be. I would say we're looking at a lost generation right now. It's very sad. And then just to cap off this whole topic, school shootings. I don't know of any other country on the planet that has the amount of school shootings that we do. It's horrific. I do not envy the parents who have to prepare their children for that. And it's a problem that continues to just go unaddressed every time. Now, I'd like to state for the record what the American dream was originally and how that doesn't translate to today. Back in the 1950s and 60s, the American dream was alive and well. And if you ask different people today, they might give you a slight variation on what they think it is, but essentially what it was the freedom to live the life that you want to live without interference from the government. We have our laws, and those must be abided, but we also have our freedoms, and those cannot be infringed upon. And essentially, what the American dream was, in my opinion, was the ability to go to work, to earn an income, buy a modestly sized home, the white picket fence thing, have 2.5 kids, maybe 1 or 2 cars, maybe a vacation every year, and the ability to climb the ladder at work and get promoted, and the ability to do all of this on one singular household income. And the reason I'm laying this out for you is because I believe that this is the picture that most of the world has of America today from our movies and TV shows. And I also think that it is the picture that a majority of older Americans still think is achievable today. But for most of the population, the reality is that this is pretty unattainable for most people. For most people, especially those under 40, there's all these roadblocks that are put in place. And again, if you ask people today, they're going to give you a slight variation on what they think the American dream is. But what the American dream is not is lavish cars and big houses and going to Ivy League schools and being an influencer. The American dream is just a very, very simple idea, and anyone living here should be able to work for it. And I personally, I hate that women in this country are pressured to go to work, whether they have kids or not. But there's really no other way to pay for all of the necessities that you have to pay for in this country unless you have two incomes. And it's ridiculous, especially when you factor in the cost of childcare. And it's made a lot of women and men very unhappy because they can't do what they were designed to do, which is raise their own children. And I'll probably get some hate for that statement because it's not feminist, but actually it is. Women should be able to do whatever they want, and right now they can't, most of them. And just going back to the American dream idea for a minute, what I described to you is long dead. But there is this new idea that's been popping up, which I'm going to dub the new American dream. I see this among millennials a lot. I've seen it from my friends that I talk to. I see it online. When asked, what would you do if you won the lottery? A lot of millennials will say, I would buy a big plot of land and invite all of my friends to come live on it. And we'd grow crops and raise livestock and take care of each other's kids and pets and basically just sing Kumbaya. Now, this might sound really hippy-dippy to you, and it's not necessarily the life that I would choose for myself, at least at this moment in time, but it does say something to me. Millennials are fed up. We don't want to be forced into this corporatist, elitist culture anymore, and we understand that pretty much everyone is going through this right now, and we're just done with it. I've noticed that millennials tend to be very generous with what little wealth they have because, as the statement goes, the less you have, the more generous you tend to be. And we understand that this whole pick yourself up by your bootstraps mentality was never a phrase that was meant to be taken seriously because it's literally describing a thing that's impossible to do. So if the happiest that we can be is living on a ranch together, far away from government interference and corporate greed and commercialism slapping us in the face every time we turn a corner, then hey, we'll take it. Now, jobs. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons why somebody can't get ahead in this country is because of low wages. Wages are far too low for the cost of living in this country, and that's in every state. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25, where it has been since 2009. 13 years and we have not had an increase in minimum wage, even though the cost of living has skyrocketed. Frankly, I don't even know why we have a minimum wage anymore because it is supposed to be the required amount to live on, and it's just not that. I don't know anyone who makes less than $10 an hour, and even that is poverty wages at this point, so why do we even really have a minimum wage? That's just my opinion. But workers have been pushing for a $15 minimum wage for a very long time. So long, in fact, that we should be pushing for a $25 minimum wage at this point. Now, New York City, I believe, has a $15 minimum wage. If they don't, they will in the next couple of years, I believe. But even this is not enough to live in a city with this high of cost of living. The cheapest apartments you can find are around $800, and this is with a roommate, and typically is going to be in a illegal dwelling, like a basement apartment with no windows. A bunch of people recently died in a hurricane this way. But either way, you're going to have a roommate. If you have a family and you need a bigger place, you can expect to pay at least $1,200. Now let's talk about finding said jobs. Obviously, the best way you can find a job is if somebody you know gives it to you, but let's be realistic. Times have changed, And I get very frustrated with the older generations who still say you can go out and pound the pavement, meaning go door to door and drop off your resume. This is not the case anymore. Boy, I wish it was. And I was of working age when this was the case. I actually did get a few jobs this way in my early career. But these days, if you do this, they will just tell you to go apply online. Everything's online. So what will you find when you go online? You'll find an application that'll take you about an hour to fill out. First, you'll do the About Me section, your birthday, race, sex, military status, criminal history, etc. Then you'll fill out an application for the company. The same type of questionnaire you would fill out on a piece of paper in the days of yore. Then you'll fill out a behavioral / skills type of questionnaire, a like what would you do in this situation type of thing. Most of the time these questions are very silly and would probably be done better in person. After that, you'll provide your resume and your references, even though you've probably already done this on the website, on the profile that they made you create in order to fill out the application on the job site where they posted the job. Then a cover letter, which no one will ever read. Seriously, no one looks at it. But if you don't do it, you might just get passed over because you didn't do it. Once you've done all of that, you might get an email or a phone call. Yay, because now you can maybe find out what this job is paying. Then comes the fun part. 2, 3, 4 rounds of interviews where they'll ask you all the same questions over again because they didn't look at your application. And what's so funny about these companies is that they will post for an entry-level job and then require 10 years of experience in an unrelated field where they're offering you $35,000 a year, and then they'll say no one wants to work. When they write entry level, what they truly want is somebody who is a skilled person that they can pay entry-level wages to. And for a lot of people, money is so tight right now that they will take these jobs that do not respect them at all because they have no other choice. The United States is the only wealthy country in the world that offers 0 in paid maternity or paternity leave. This makes no sense for obvious reasons, but also because the main reason for not doing this is that they say it'll take the mother or father away from work. But there's plenty of evidence from other countries to show that paid parental leave can actually increase a woman's participation in the workforce, it reduces gender wage gaps, and it improves the well-being of both the parents and the baby by enabling parents time off while ensuring that they still have job security and income protection, and it gives the mother time to recover mentally and physically after having just pushed a football through her hoo-ha. Another thing that older generations just don't seem to grasp is that all the benefits that were awarded to them when they were coming up are no longer offered. Things like pensions, 401ks, retirement plans, etc. These things used to come with jobs as a way to incentivize the workers, but now they're few and far between. And even if your job does offer this, chances are you will be fired or you'll quit before you ever have the opportunity to draw on them. And this is by design. The so-called gig economy, where workers work for tips or commissions or they're contracted, has become very attractive to employees because they don't have to offer these things in order to compete. And this is kind of a thing that millennials did to ourselves. People are moving from job to job a lot faster now for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason being because this is the fastest way to get a pay raise. See, you can no longer work your way up the ladder. Employers are more likely to give an incoming employee a higher wage than they are to give an existing employee a raise. At one time, 88% of private sector workers who had a retirement plan had a pension. Now that number is only 33%. Workers used to be able to work for 20 to 30 years in a position at a company, and they would eventually have a nice, secure pension at the end of it. That is mostly gone. There are many reasons for this, one being a series of laws that was passed in the mid 80s to mid 2000s, but a bigger reason is a decline in unionization. And pensions don't really work as well as 401ks because pensions aren't really worth anything if the employee doesn't stay long enough to vest. And this can cause major liabilities for the employer. Now let's talk about corporate culture. A lot of people hate their managers, and there are truly a lot of bad managers out there. But I would venture a guess that most of them, or a lot of them, actually do want to be liked, and I would even go so far as to say they would want you to have better working conditions and pay you more, but they just can't because of the mindset that they'll be let go for not following the procedures that are put in place by upper management, who, by the way, have never done your job before. They've never met you, and they don't know the best way to run things, even though they think they do. But to be very clear, all you accomplish when you improve things at work is give the upper management the impression that things can be done with a smaller staff, inadequate payroll, shorter break times, etc. You will not be rewarded. You'll actually be punished and be given a heavier workload. For hilarious commentary on this, go watch Office Space. It's a classic and it's great. There are certain companies, most bigger companies, who are beholden to their shareholders and not their customers or their employees. And they actually prefer to run things on a skeleton crew to save those pennies. And this creates a big problem for the workers and the consumers. What do you think happens when one person is working a register and flipping burgers at lunchtime, and then you get an entire line out the door? Well, people get pissed and they have to wait, and then the person who's working gets stressed to the max and they literally can't take a break. And eventually people will stop going to this place because it's just too big of a hassle. But it will remain in operation so long as it's making money, even if that money is fake. I'll give you another example of classic corporate greed. Right now, gas prices are out of control. They're astronomical, and rideshare apps such as Uber have always made their employees, which are not employees, they're contracted workers or some sort of BS that they call them. They've always made their employees pay for their own gas and everything that comes with driving a car. But instead of picking up some of these extra costs that are happening right now, which they could easily afford to do, Uber has passed a surcharge onto the consumer. Even though there are way more people who are using their product than there are shareholders, this is what they choose to do. They'd rather lose a bunch of customers than take a hit to their stock, because if they take a hit to their stock, they look less profitable. And if they look less profitable, they will in turn get less investment. They certainly don't care about those on the bottom rung of their business. They care about their stock prices, which is why the entire American economy is a joke. The corporate business model today is low quality for premium prices. If these companies can manage to pay low wages and give poor quality services, they will, because it's more profitable that way. And they contribute nothing back to their local economy by doing this either. I will give a shout out to Costco. This is where we do our shopping normally, because to my knowledge, it's the only publicly traded company that still treats their workers pretty decently, still pays them well, and still has quality product standards. But they remain very, very wealthy. And you don't see pages and pages of worker complaints like you do everywhere else. But unfortunately, Costco is a rare exception, which again is low quality for premium prices. You might not be aware of the fact that mom and pop shops are disappearing. And maybe you don't care, but you should. There is this vicious cycle that keeps happening. And honestly, I don't have the answers of how to fix it, but I just know that it's destroying every part of our society and driving up the costs of living. The cycle goes something like this. A mom and pop shop can't afford to raise wages because they're not making enough at the store. Then a big corporation comes in and undercuts prices. Shoppers start going there because it's more affordable. Big corporation raises wages with its new profits. Mom and pop shop closes because they cannot afford to pay their workers more. Their products were already more expensive because they're a higher quality. The big corporation is now a monopoly. People are poorer. Big corporation raises prices because they can. Now it's the only place that people in that area can shop. Then they break up unions because they can. They stop raising wages even though inflation has gone up because they can. Now people are poorer. And the old folks go, you make $15 an hour? Back in my day, I lived on 3 nickels and Jesus. Yes, Grandma, but you see, your purchasing power was far greater. And mom and pop shops are very, very important. And until the US stops buying cheap Chinese goods and instead buys local, more expensive, quality products, this will not change. And we'll eventually go back to having company towns. If you don't know what this is, look it up. It's where we're headed. In corporate culture, we are taught that we're not allowed to talk about wages. I say taught and not told because it's illegal for an employer to say this to an employee, but they will find loopholes to get their point across. Almost all US states are at-will states. This means that you can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. Exceptions would be race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. But again, they can fire you for no reason at all. So you will not have the proof that you need that you were discriminated against. But I do know firsthand that talking about wages at your job is taboo, and this needs to change fast. Income disparity is a huge problem in this country. It's why our homeless population keeps going up year after year. We are unique in the Western world as in that you can make extreme amounts of money in this country if you're lucky. But this also means that inevitably there's going to be a larger income disparity, which hurts the middle and lower classes. The US is a fantastic place to live if you make above the average income. But Europe is a much better place to live if you don't. They have lower salaries, but their buying power is much, much higher. And this will lead in perfectly to the cost of living. We've all heard the saying, money can't buy happiness. And as per usual, this is a sentiment that has been misinterpreted over the decades. There was a study done in 2010 that showed money can't buy happiness if you're already making over $75,000 a year. $75,000 at that time was enough to live very comfortably, but anything below that almost guarantees you won't be happy because you're in a constant state of stress to be able to pay your bills. You don't have time, which is a much more valuable commodity, to do anything pleasurable. If when you're constantly working, you have to spend any downtime you have, doing things, you can't recuperate and you're not doing anything that you actually enjoy. On the flip side, if you are making anything over $75,000, you'll start to see diminishing returns in happiness, meaning the more wealth you accumulate and don't actually need, the more unhappy you will be. And adjusted for inflation, today that number would be about $128,000 a year. So for people who say money can't buy happiness, you can say back to them, it really depends on how much money you have. Any poor person will tell you that 100% of their problems would be solved with money. The cost of living in this country now is far too high. If you don't make, even if you do make the wages that you need and you don't have any debt or any hospital bills, the cost of living can still wreck you. The things that we work for are just a lot harder to get and harder to actually keep. I am so endlessly frustrated with the older generations in this country who just refuse to understand how bad things are. They refuse to get it. Now, Martin and I were blessed enough to be able to afford a house. And I will tell you right now, it is not because we worked hard. It was solely because Martin was able to save a little bit of money doing commercials, which pay pretty well and provide residuals. So something most people aren't lucky enough to be able to do. It's also why I find it super cringe when all the celebrities these days are doing all the commercials. They're taking away spots from people who might be up and coming, who actually need the money and the exposure. But I can tell you right now, all the jobs we've had over the years would not have been able to afford us a home on just our work money. What's that like, boomers? Just wondering. Our entire generation has not been able to afford housing as a general rule, and boomers will say, oh, you'll get there eventually. Or my favorite, well, I had to work hard and kids just don't want to work these days. Really, Karen? Because some of us are almost 40, but go off. In fact, Martin was able to get us into this house for as cheap as possible. Here's something crazy people might not know. You've all heard the expression, it's so expensive to be poor. Well, check this out. We would not have been able to afford a single family household in New York City, but we could afford a 2-family home in New York City. Why? Because they take the potential income into account when qualifying you for your loan. Now everyone knows that the rents in New York City are stupid. I think that when we bought this place, they estimated we could probably make about $2,700 a month on rent, something crazy like that. But we couldn't afford a single family home. And I don't even want to tell you what our mortgage was. You probably wouldn't believe me anyway. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, all bets were off for New York City landlords to hang on to their properties without collecting rent. Renters got money directly into their hands, and there was a rent moratorium for a very long time, but homeowners still had to pay for their mortgage, home insurance, flood insurance, repairs, HOAs, pest control, snow removal, taxes. And actually there was a program that did roll out. It was created last April, and it has yet to be implemented even to this day. New York City is just trash. So yeah, a lot of people my age are still renting and with no end in sight. And they also don't know what it's like to own a home and hang on to your home. They make it very hard. They really be trying to take everything from us out here. So now I'm gonna go over some real numbers with you so that you don't think I'm being hyperbolic about the cost of living. I'm gonna compare stats from 1971 to 2021. Right now as I record this, it's 2022, but we don't have the stats yet because it's too early in the year. So, federal minimum wage in 1971 was $1.60. 2021, federal minimum wage was $7.25. This is a 453% increase. A new house. Mind you, before people attack me in the comments, these are averages. I can't include everything. I know you don't have to buy a new house or a new this or that, but these are averages. So I'm just trying to compare apples to apples. 1971, a new house was $25,200. Today, for $408,800. This is a 1,662% increase. A new car in 1971 was $3,560. Today, it is $47,100. This is a 1,323% increase. Average rent, 1971, was $150 a month. Average rent today is $1,621 a month. This is a 1,080% increase. Tuition to go to Harvard was $2,600 a year, now $51,143 a year. This is a 1,967% increase. Gasoline, mind you, this is last year, so it doesn't apply to right now. Gas was 40 cents a gallon. Gas is now $3.50 a gallon. This is an $875 increase. Believe it or not, I was alive and I remember when gas was under $1. It happened. Postage stamp in 1971 was 8 cents. Postage stamp today is 58 cents. This is a 725% increase. A movie ticket was $1.50. A movie ticket now, $10. 666% increase. Now food. Sugar was 62 cents for 5 pounds. Now $2.95 for 5 pounds. This is a 475% increase. Milk was $1.17 a gallon. Now $3.66 a gallon. 312% increase. Coffee was 98 cents a pound. Now $8.50 a pound. This is a 867% increase. Bacon was 80 cents a pound. Now $7.25 a pound. This is a 901% increase. Eggs were 45 cents a dozen. Now $1.82 a dozen. 404% increase. Ground hamburger was 62 cents a pound. Now $4.60 a pound. 741% increase. A loaf of bread was 25 cents. Now $2.50. This is a 1000% increase. And for the average income, again, average, I can't account for everything. In 1971, the average income was $10,622 a year. In 2021, it is $67,521 a year. This is a 635% increase. Some more stats for you. In 2021, the cost of living rose 23%. One would need to make $20 an hour to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment. The poverty rate is 29%, and that is because instead of having a living wage as a minimum, we have a poverty wage as a minimum. Senior citizens have no security. Life expectancy is only 79 years old, and the retirement age is 65, which will increase to 67 over a 22-year period, just in time for my generation to want to retire because they are trying to kill us. And Social Security that we've paid into our entire lives is just about dried up because the government keeps stealing from us. Senior citizens' pensions are not enough to cover their property taxes. So even after they finally pay off their house, they never really own their house because they still have to probably work to cover the cost of that. Only 11.3% of workers are protected by unions. We rank only 14th in the world for happiest countries. Only 63% of the population has home ownership. Of that, only 17% are millennials, but we make up the largest swath of the workforce. We have no paid vacations. We have no paid parental leave. The average personal tax rate is almost 40%. For us, it's higher because we pay federal, state, and city tax. Debt slavery, here in the land of the free, we have normalized forcing our young people to amass crippling amounts of debt just so they can participate in this so-called economy that doesn't meet their basic needs, even if they work full-time. The cost of food and beverage has risen 24%. Cost of electricity has risen 15%. Despite a recent decline in the cost of vehicles, used trucks and cars are still up 23%. This was last year, mind you. People got to get to work. Gasoline now costs 20% more, and that's probably more like 50% more at this point. And finally, I'm just going to compare apples to apples. When boomers were of working age, 25 to 43, compared to when millennials were of working age, comparing their wealth from then to now. Boomers in 1989 had 21% of overall US household wealth. Millennials today, 6% of overall US household wealth. Boomers in 1989 had 32% of US household real estate. Millennials today, 12%. Boomers in 1989 had 18% of US household corporate equities and mutual shares. Millennials, 2%. And if you want to check this, go on the Federal Reserve website. So just to wrap this section up, what boomers don't seem to understand is that when they say things like, well, I suffered and I worked hard, but it paid off. Well, yeah, I guess working 1,000,000 hours isn't that bad if at the end of it, you get to buy a house and send your kids to college and one day maybe even be able to retire. It's not ideal, but it paid off for them and they think it will pay off for us. They don't understand just how far the goalposts have moved. and how much harder it is for us. They really feel like if you work hard, eventually you'll have something to show for it. And that's just not necessarily the case anymore. We are drowning as a generation, and this is why we hate them so much. I'm half kidding, but I do have to kind of take a moment right now to trash boomers a little bit, because they are one of the biggest reasons why our lives suck so much. A lot of them should be retired at this point, but they just refuse to leave. They have everything, especially those in the government. Get out. Let us have a chance. But anyway, I realized this about my own parents recently, and I have amazing parents. I am not about to trash them at all, just their entire generation. They got to start their lives, starting their careers, getting married, having babies, back in the early 80s, early 90s. Late 80s, early 90s. This was the perfect decade. Seriously. The US won the Cold War. The 80s recession was over. The economy was booming. We had all this new tech coming in. Things were affordable. Things were accessible. Right up until about 9/11. And there was a huge financial fallout. Housing, vehicles, education, medical care, everything went through the roof, which led to the 2008 housing bubble burst, which led to the Great Recession, and basically the 20 years after that, right when millennials were graduating and trying to start their lives, which is why we are considered a financially lost generation, because our prime earning years were stolen from us. We had to go into a tight job market, stagnant wages, high credit requirements, thank you 1989, and a crazy high cost of living. So excuse me, boomers, if we don't feel like everything's gonna be all right. We've heard this before, for 20 years in fact. The last topic is more of an all-encompassing culture section. I never in a million years thought that I would ever want to leave the United States, because I do believe that we were the greatest nation on earth when I was growing up. But since about the mid-2000s, we've been on a rapid decline, to the point where today I have virtually nothing good to say about it. I would say that we're more of an second world capitalist society that thrives on its people being in a constant state of near dying, so that big pharma can get that continuous revenue from never curing us of anything, and so that corporations can continuously exploit their workers by paying them slave wages. Meanwhile, our government seizes more and more control by pitting us against one another. Old versus young, rich versus poor, or middle class rather versus poor, black versus white, gay versus straight. It's all a distraction, and it works pretty well. We will fight about what channel the other side decides to watch. Meanwhile, there's no such thing as objective journalism anymore. They don't even pretend to go out and follow a story anymore. And those who do are silenced. We have a fat culture. As a matter of fact, we are seeing a fat pride trend on our social media. I say our social media because this is what Americans are fed. Other countries would scoff at such obvious brainwashing, but Americans, we are forced to eat some of the most overprocessed, unhealthy food on the planet, all in the name of overconsumption and decadence, and the result is that we are one of the most obese nations on Earth. It's quite embarrassing, but it's also very scary how heart disease is the #1 killer in our country. It's not always our fault. It can be very expensive to eat healthy, and in my case, for example, access to healthy food can be very, very difficult. But this all goes back to keeping the population as unhealthy as possible so that they can sell us more of their BS to fix the problem. In fact, every other commercial that you'll see on TV is ask your doctor about such and such a drug. See if such and such is right for you. Like, the pharmaceutical marketing in this country is insane. Why should I have to ask my doctor about a drug? They're the ones that went to medical school. But the brainwashing in this country to make our citizens believe that America is the best place to live runs very deep. Our products are sometimes designed to stop working. Yes, you heard me correctly. It's called planned obsolescence, a policy of producing consumer goods that rapidly become obsolete and so require replacing, achieved by frequent changes in design, termination of the supply of spare parts, and the use of non-durable materials. Allow me to give you some examples. There are products that are literally coded to stop working, such as iPhones. iPhones are not cheap, and you figure when you buy one, you shouldn't have to replace it for several years. Everything's working just fine until all of a sudden one day the code will tell the phone that it's time for the battery to stop working. Or maybe you have signal issues all of a sudden, or page loading issues that you've never had before. Or car parts. If you've recently bought a gas guzzler, looking at you, Mom, you may be in for a rude awakening in a few short years when all the car parts that you need to fix your baby suddenly are very hard to get, and it will be considered more of a luxury item. Or on a personal example, Martin and I recently bought a really nice coffee maker. Yes, it was a splurge. This was a little over a year ago, and it was in perfect working condition. We took excellent care of it. We kept up with the maintenance every day. And then all of a sudden it just stops working right after the warranty ends. But this is called planned obsolescence. It's just a shady business practice designed to have you buying products more often than you should have to. I cannot overstate this. Companies that are too big to fail, because our government will always bail them out, are the reason why our country has failed. They are the reason why we no longer have a democracy. Companies are running our country, not people. Companies like BlackRock, who are buying up single-family homes so that they can rent them to you, and buying up everything else. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy, as the World Economic Forum has told us. You would think with all of the insane amount of taxes that we pay in this country, wage tax, social security, city, state, federal, homeowners tax, home sellers tax, home buyers tax, company tax, that we would have something to show for it. I mean, our socialistic programs in this country, I think, used to be pretty good. Post office, roads, bridges, tunnels, libraries. I have gripes with all of them now. What am I paying for? Even the programs that are designed to help the neediest among us, food stamps, disability payments, shelters, and other social safety net programs, are all complete garbage. And while I do want some of my tax dollars to go to the US military, because I want us to have the strongest military in the world, the government is lying to us about how much they spend on the military. It goes up by billions and billions every year. We cannot have a surplus. We've got to be able to spend more the following year, but we are definitely not strengthening our military. In fact, for the first time in my entire life, I am actually kind of embarrassed by our military. It's our government's job to protect us, but our borders are wide open. Crime is skyrocketing, mostly in bigger cities, but all over the country, crime has gone up. It's unsafe to walk in certain areas, and I myself, after nearly 10 years of living in New York City, am terrified to get on the subway. I could dive into more topics such as religion, Hollywood, and politics another time, but I don't want this video to be 3 hours long. There are many more reasons why we want to leave the United States, but these are the main ones. The overlying theme being it is just very, very expensive to be an American. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for my next one where I talk about why we want to move to Poland.